Scooby Dooby Doo.
Hello.
Hey, man. So I've been playing phone tag with a customer we just did a huge fucking job for. And I finally just got a hold of him. I called him back like right after we got done with that episode. He called me during the episode. And I was expecting like something happened or something went wrong. And he was just calling to just tell me again how awesome everything turned out and how much he appreciates the work we did. And the rain came the other night.
I can't hear you. Hold on. Let me see if I can exit and then.
Can you hear me now? How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Did you hear anything I said before?
No, nothing. I was wondering what was going on. I know you're not muted.
So I've been playing phone tag with this customer we just did a huge job for. Bunch of rock and drainage work. And he's been calling me all day, and then I keep calling him back, and I keep getting his voicemail. So he called while we were recording with Paul just a minute ago, and I called him back when we got done, and I thought something went wrong. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, oh shit, did something go wrong with what we did or whatever, you know? But no, he was just calling me to tell me again how awesome it turned out, how much they like it, and how appreciative he is of the work I did. And it rained the other night, and everything drained perfectly. There's no standing water, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, fucking, I mean, awesome. But the way you were calling me, it seemed like something was wrong. You know, it's like, so I was like fucking nervous about it all day. But now, sure enough, I'm just awesome, I guess. So that was an added bonus. But
yeah, I needed that time for a nap. I'm glad you ended that sooner than I thought. And I thought, yeah, a little out of it right now.
I know I'm probably just gonna go to bed real early. Hey, hello, Sheldon. How's it going?
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good.
Doing well. How's things on your end?
Well, I had a bit of a mishap. I had a disagreement with a half a flight of stairs from a deck, and so my right arm, which is my strong arm, has been in a sling for a couple of weeks.
Oh no! Are you in a lot of pain?
I'm not in pain.
Oh, okay.
And judging by the X-ray, it's sort of a minor, like hairline fracture. But the doctor said he didn't put me in a cast; just keep it in the sling and don't move it. So I'm working left-handed.
Oh no! And you're a writer too. That's got to be really hard.
Well, I took last week off from typing, and I'll probably not type this coming week. But I can do this. This doesn't require any typing.
This doesn't require your arms. Nope, just your brain and your mouth. So that'd be good.
Okay.
Well, hopefully that heals up quick for you.
Thank you.
So we will. Penguin will do the. Penguin is my co-host here. Penguin, this is Sheldon.
Hey.
And he will do the intro of the podcast, and then he'll throw it over to me, and I will introduce you as our guest, and then we'll get rocking and rolling.
Okay.
Do you have a hard stop? We were thinking about an hour, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can make an hour. Yep.
Okay, that'll be perfect. All right. Well, everybody sounds good, Penguin, and I think we're ready to go.
We're back. Welcome back to the Agora Podcast. It's your home for agorism, localism, radical decentralization, and anti-authoritarian concepts. I'm Penguin. I'm here with my co-host Sek Agora, as always. Just enjoying a nice, slow and relaxing Saturday. Sek, how's it going?
It's going. It's that time of the year again, man. You know how it is. I've been running myself ragged, so I'm pretty tired. I need a little bit of rest. So
yeah, super busy over here too.
Yeah. Well, today we got a special guest, and I'll tell you a little backstory. When we first started this podcast, about what has it been? 2 years, Penguin?
Yeah, about that.
Penguin and I had a conversation about some of the guests that we'd really love to have. And today we've got one of those guests. We got Sheldon Richman, and I think our audience should know who, or should be familiar with Sheldon. But if you're not, Sheldon is executive director of the Libertarian Institute. I mean, he's a writer. He's got a bunch of books and a ton of articles. He was editor of the Freeman for a long time. He was a writer at C4SS. He's been in our circles and been putting out great writing for a number of years, all of which that I've enjoyed. So if you're not familiar with Sheldon, you should go check out his work. And Sheldon Richman, welcome to the Agora the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for that introduction. By the way, I just want a minor correction. I'm executive editor of the Libertarian Institute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Okay. Executive editor. That's right.
That's right. Now I'm doing great.
Excellent. How are you liking it over there? You've been there since the beginning, so.
Yes, I am. I'm one of the founders with Scott and the late Norman Grigg, or Will Grigg, and it's exciting things going on. All kinds of new people have been brought on board, and if you check out the website every day, you'll see some great stuff, original and some of the best reposts as well.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot more new writing over there, and that's good. I'm enjoying it. So yeah, as I said in the intro, you are probably one of the libertarians that we draw from the most. There's a small handful that I would put on that list, and in terms of sort of contemporary thinkers, you're right up there as one of our favorites. No, you're welcome. Happy to have you on. And Gary Chartier would be another. We had him on I don't know, 6 months ago. He'd be up on that list, and he sang your praises when he was on, I believe. So
he's a good friend.
What's that? I'm sorry.
He's a good friend of mine.
Oh, I know it. Yeah. So let's before we get into sort of thoughts and ideals, can we do a little backstory on you? Like, what was your journey to where you are today? What was that like?
Well, I've been around a while, and I started thinking libertarian thoughts and beginning to read stuff in the very late 60s. Started college in Philadelphia, where I'm from, Temple University, in 1967, and was involved in the local. First was a YAF chapter, but then the libertarians broke away from YAF, and it became the Society of Individual Liberty. We were a chapter of that. So I've been reading and writing and, being an activist for a while. After college, though, I went into the newspaper business. So I spent about 7 years as a reporter in Pennsylvania, Wilmington, Delaware. But then from there, moved to the movement professionally, or when I got my first job, which was it was with the council, a group that doesn't exist anymore, the Council for a Competitive Economy. In about 1979, I moved down to D.C. and we started. We wanted to be a really free market version of say Chamber of Commerce. We wanted to oppose the things that businessmen usually want. So our first big fight, which we didn't win, by the way, was the bailout of Chrysler under the Carter administration, when the head of Chrysler, Lee Iacocca, was looking for help because he got into trouble financially. The company did, and we placed ads and we agitated. We probably testified, wrote all kinds of articles, and so that was the beginning of it. From there, I've been with a few different organizations. I was the editor of the Freeman for 15 years. That was the longest single job I held. And that was from the late 90s, into, I don't know, 2012 or 13, somewhere in there. Worked for the Cato Institute before that, worked for the Institute for Humane Studies, Citizens for a Sound Economy. All of these were, to some extent, libertarian organizations that addressed mostly economic stuff. With Cato, of course, it was the whole range of topics, and the Freeman was pretty good range of topics as well.
So previous to libertarian politics, where did you sit politically, or did you have a political home before that?
Well, sort of, but Chris, I guess my awakening politically was the Goldwater campaign, which is true of a lot of people my age, a lot of libertarians my age. I had an older brother who was in favor of Goldwater. He was a couple of years older than me, and so I was learning about it from him. My parents were sort of mildly conservative Republicans, but unusual for the neighborhood I was in, which was mostly Democrats. So I, just by osmosis, just sort of leaned that way. But I was interested in Goldwater talking about individual liberty, which he did a lot, and so that always attracted me. I liked stories as a kid that involved the American Revolution, and what I saw as a battle for individual liberty. So I always leaned that way. So yeah, I was drawn. When you're young and you don't see the big picture, it looked like the Democrats and Republicans. I was leaning toward the people that were talking about free enterprise, because I was kind of unsophisticated at that point. And with Goldwater, I hadn't been thinking about foreign policy yet. He was quite hawkish. I wouldn't have, if I knew then what I know now, it would have been a hard time being for Goldwater. But at least on the domestic side, he did talk about the need to limit government, and that sounded good to me at that stage. So that's the direction I came from.
It's amazing to me how many folks, let's say from your generation, you're a tad older than we are, came out of the Goldwater campaign or movement, and that's surprising in and of itself. But it also amazes me how many different directions those people took. So you look at people like yourself and Carl Hess, and I believe even I can't remember, is it Chartier or Chartier? He told me and I forgot.
Chartier.
Yeah. And I believe he said similar things. At least his folks were Goldwater Republicans, I believe. But but you are, I would say, all very distinct or different from Goldwater in a lot of different ways. You sort of took what you might call a left libertarian path, as opposed to some other Goldwater, but it still all comes back to Goldwater for a lot of people. And
and like you mentioned Hess, when Hess worked as a speechwriter for Goldwater, he was still a conservative. He wrote a book right after that campaign called "In a Cause That Will Triumph," and it was about how even though Goldwater lost, the future is with what Goldwater was talking about. Now Hess changed quite a bit in the next few years. He was an editor even at Newsweek, so he was still kind of establishment. And I got to know Hess a little bit later on, when he got involved in the Libertarian Party. But I think I met him before that. And of course, he, after a while had become a welder and was wearing overalls, and he wasn't dressing like a Main Street Republican at all. And I learned a lot from him. I mean, back when he and Murray Rothbard were associated, I was following them closely. I had met them both, was at several events that they both appeared at. And you could say, I was influenced by Hess, certainly with Rothbard too, and I could name others, but Hess was one of those early people. And he was anti-war. This is where I started hearing the idea that you can't, I was still believed in government back then, but you can't, how do you limit government if you're policing the world? Going to war everywhere. Can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm partially
war is the
through
health of the state, as they say.
Yep.
I'm partially through that Carl Hess's biography so far, so I'm around that point. It's really making me think like this is probably a much bigger version. So instead of trying to compare it one way, probably compare it the opposite. That a recent example of something probably a much smaller, less significant, or maybe not example, I guess we have yet to see, is the Ron Paul movement. That spike, I guess, in 2 presidential campaigns where there was a kind of coalescing and some sort of a movement around Dr. Paul, for whatever you think of him. Where people have gone from that, where people did come together from all sorts of different dissident parts of political and not so political life, and then where people have kind of branched off from that into various different directions and maybe multiple branches off from those. But it's so diverse how far people have come from that, but how that was kind of a pivotal moment that may not have actually had a lasting material influence on exactly people's ideas, but that is just a springboard to a lot of the places we are now, and the people that are now in their 30s and 40s and so forth, going on into different political movements, and how much they might have been part of that Ron Paul movement in 2008 and 2012.
Right, and Ron Paul, of course, was heavily influenced by Murray Rothbard, and who helped set up the Mises Institute. So you can see how the chain, one link connects to the next link. One person influences the next person, or hopefully more than one person, but it gets passed along. And Ron Paul's message about the Federal Reserve, comes right out of Murray, who spent so much time writing and speaking about money, what government has done to our money. On several occasions, he published things about why it's just wrong for government to be involved in money. You can't tell where someone will come out of. You talked about different directions people went. I mean, I remember hearing stories about people who read The Fountainhead and joined the New Left back in the 60s. So, you never can be sure what a person's going to conclude from something.
So not too long ago, I was listening to you on Roderick Long's podcast, the Agora Cafe. I don't know if he's still doing that or not, but
I haven't seen one in a while. I guess he's been busy.
Yeah, he is a busy man. But I really enjoyed that interview. It was very informative, but it was also felt like just 2 old friends having a casual conversation, which I really enjoyed. And you mentioned that how much Long was an influence on you and sort of moving to what you might call the libertarian left. And I guess, do you think we're seeing a resurgence of that milieu or ethos now? Like, where do you think the state of things are in terms of let's say, the movement of the libertarian left?
That may be the hardest question you could have possibly asked.
It's a good one. Yeah. There might not be a right answer here either. So
things are such a mess right now that I'm even reluctant to use the word libertarian left, because I don't think it communicates.
Yes.
I defended that term, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but I just don't think it gets across, because there's so much, look at the left these days. There are a couple of strands. You have the what's called the woke left, the identity politics, which I have severe problems with. But then you also have the opponents on the left of the identity politics people are the class. They want a class politics rather than identity politics. But their class politics is not very good either. It's not informed by the old radical classical liberal division of what happens when the state intervenes and taxes and subsidizes favored groups. They have a completely different. They have much more of a Marxian notion, right? That even someone who sets up a business and hires some people to work for him, that person is an exploiter, which I think is nonsense. So I don't know where things stand, really. I know where I stand. I mean, my views have not changed, but I'm a little bit careful about the labels, because I don't want to be seen on the right, because I don't believe I'm on the right. But there are some people on the right who agree with a lot of positions I take. In fact, they've even gotten more and more anti-war and more anti-surveillance state and intelligence community. While people on the left, at least some people on the left, are pro intelligence community, pro surveillance. So it's very confusing at the moment. I guess
I could agree more with what you're saying about that. That's exactly kind of what I've been going through over the past few years, not having been in these spaces for very long, but over the past couple of years specifically. Originally coming to this, like when we started the podcast, really having this idea of the movement of the libertarian left and kind of the ideas, because we are, to some extent, and I just want to see what you think about this, we're to some extent reacting to a conservative right-wing libertarian fusion that had existed in people's minds, and and this is very true, like in everyday people's minds, that libertarianism is a very conservative aligned, very right-wing phenomenon in political movement, and how they describe, how the average person describes libertarianism is probably pretty off from how we probably would. But at the same time, I don't think it very accurately at all captures, like you mentioned, any alliance with the existing left-wing groups and left-wing ideology, and even historical left-wing ideology. I've really come to, over the past year, an idea, and I've always been saying this, but now I really mean it, like from the heart. Like it truly is so far from both somewhere on a right wing and left wing spectrum that we say things that might seem very far in one direction or another, something that might sound very right wing, but truly our fundamental attitudes and goals is like, as market oriented, radical libertarians, are fundamental goals and worldview and the world that we desire is much different than anything that you could place as a kind of a right wing objective, so to say, or a left wing. I really think that the idea that is so far from either of those ends of that spectrum has been reinforced by kind of where I've seen politics go, and I have seen no politics obviously move any closer to what we would find desirable. So I would you agree with that it really is the cliche of neither left nor right?
I think so. Look, there are different strands of the right, some better than others. What unites them is they don't like the left, what they understand as the left. That's why they're hanging together. Some of them are more free market and a little more, they're becoming more anti-war. They're understanding the dangers of that. On the other hand, you have the populist right who are now doubtful about war, but they want that. One reason is because they want the money spent by the government on what they would say is, America. This is like America first. They don't want to leave it in the pockets of the taxpayers. They just don't want it spent on Ukraine or somewhere in the Middle East or China or Russia. They want it spent on, rehabilitating factories in the Midwest, even though robots are doing the work now, and or rebuilding roads or something like that. I mean, that's sort of what Trump says. Trump doesn't say, I want to cut the Pentagon budget. First of all, I don't think he wants to cut the Pentagon budget, but if he did, he wouldn't say it's in order to give the money, to let the taxpayers keep the money. It's that he has other uses for it at home. You hear people say, why are we protecting Iraq's border, but we're not protecting our border? You hear the right wing say things like that.
Yeah.
So I part ways with those people. There could be individuals who are much more free market oriented who call themselves on the right that I have more agreement with, but those people would then tend to be hawkish. It's the old package deal. People think a bunch of disparate positions somehow go together, and you got to accept them all. And my test is what limits the state, if not gets rid of it, or at least limits it, rolls back the power, and leaves power in the hands of individuals and their private associations and efforts to cooperate with each other. That's the test for me. And the left and the right, for the most part, don't seem to agree with that. They have their own agendas. The left has its agenda.
So something I've been saying for a while now, but at least more strongly than in the past few years, is that I don't think the terms left and right are useful for radical anti-state politics. Because once you get to the point of anarchism, now you're just talking about personal lifestyle choices, so is that really a right-wing ideological thing? I don't think so. I don't think it really applies anymore. It's just it's cooperation and free association, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't I think these terms might not be useful to us very much anymore, and they might go into the category of what some other terms might be called as anti-concepts. I think they obscure more than they actually illuminate. I think it's much better to say, what we're for rather than to try to pigeonhole ourselves into these sort of left and right categories. And a lot of folks will say, well, it's easier to outreach to the left, or vice versa. It's easier to outreach to the right for whatever reason. And I don't think either of those are true. I think you can find individuals on both quote unquote sides that you might find common ground with and be able to convince of these ideas that we hold. And I don't think it's one side or the other is the natural ally in a sense. Do you have any thoughts on those?
I agree with that because, I tried making some overtures. Now, maybe they don't read my stuff. I can't. I did what I could, but I tried making overtures to sort of left types, and I don't know. I haven't noticed any great inflow from the left. There are a bunch of sort of homeless left people who are fed up with identity politics and woke and all that stuff, but they're uneasy to the extent I hear them making comments on, say, YouTube shows. They're uneasy about libertarians. They either think libertarians are crazy or, oh my gosh, you mean an unregulated economy? Nobody's in favor of that. So while they may agree with us on some of our criticism of what's now sort of the crazy left, with critical race theory and gender politics and all that stuff, they're uneasy with us too because they think, where do you guys come from? You're still supporting free markets. They don't even know what that is. I mean, so, and I don't see us winning over people from the right either. Maybe I'm missing it, but it's not come to my attention. So I think we just need to be as clear as we can about what we're in favor of and give the best arguments we can for it. Use historical examples when we have them, and just hope for the best. But I'm not very optimistic right now. It sounds like you're not either. Right now, I don't see a lot of people buying or trying to buy what we're selling right now.
I'm pessimistic in the short term, optimistic in the long term.
That's what Mary Rothbard always used to say, right? He was a long-term optimist and a short-term pessimist.
Yeah, there you go. Let's touch on the woke thing a little bit, because and listen, maybe I've been reading too much C4SS, okay? But I wouldn't define myself as woke, but I will say that free markets and anarchism is the best course of action to uplift any sort of uplift and liberate any sort of what you might call marginalized groups currently. And I think any oppression that you're looking at in these groups ultimately stems from the state and big business. So it almost seems to me that I don't know, all this woke stuff could be solved very easily by abolishing the state and sort of crony protectionism. I mean, what do you think about that? Are we the answer?
Well, I agree with you, but that's a language that hardly anyone else understands. Abolish the state and let people handle this through property, contract, and cooperation, which is the answer I give. So they don't like property, really. And they may not be for abolishing it altogether, but they certainly don't want people just to be able to do whatever they want with the property, even if it's not harmful to anybody. I just don't think they speak that language. It's like you're speaking ancient Greek to them, and they don't really know what they're saying. You're saying that their idea is to reach for the state, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's any of these things. That's what the state's there for, as they see it. And of course, the right now, especially these national conservatives and the ones that want to have laws against pornography or the various kinds of things. The old is really an old conservative position. They're reaching for the state too now. They've stopped really defending for the strand of the right that I'm thinking of now has dropped even lip service. In fact, the nationalists say the liberal, meaning the classical liberal project, has failed. It was powerless to keep us from getting into the mess we're in today. So what do we need it for? That's what they're saying. So left, I don't see friends on the left and right for the most part. Of course, there, like you say, there are exceptions, there are individuals. But I mean, as far as movements go, I don't see them.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overlooking them. I'll be happy to have someone bring them to my attention.
No, I generally agree, and I think the best we can hope for is finding those those weirdos, those outliers, and individuals that would be receptive to our ideas, or we can at least get along with. I think, and honestly, that's what with the project we're doing is just trying to find any kind of coalition to those of us that would actually like to further these ideas, and find who we can and friends along the way. But
you mentioned the woke left. I just want to interject. You mentioned the woke left and that whole thing. I mean, I almost hate using that kind of term. It just comes from sensationalist media. But I've increasingly come very harshly against that sort of thing in a way that I really refuse to kind of jump into that fray before. And I do think it's truly very harmful and silly, and just I think there is a difference. And I don't like when libertarians try to kind of adopt leftist language to appeal to these kind of ideas. Because sure, you may not have any kind of animosity or bigotry, or want to kind of make a stand against bigotry or discrimination or whatever, however you feel. But it really isn't. I think it's very harmful to adopt the leftist framework, that kind of Marxist, oppressed class framework, or just broader leftist idea of there are oppressed people and oppressors. And I mean, it comes out of classical liberalism to an extent, but trying to uphold the oppressed working class against the artisan and ownership class, the gay and lesbian and transgender against cisgender, and the racial hierarchies and everything. The idea that we almost need to boost it and raise up and just outright fund minority groups against majority groups, just out of sheer morality. In the same way that you mentioned free association and private property, that there's almost from the left a moral compunction against these things. That these things are inherently harmful, and it's a moral quest to kind of limit or abolish these things. And I think that sometimes any kind of adoption of that framework, not to go full anti-woke, it's always never to go to the polar opposite, but that framework is just irrelevant to us. That's kind of how I see it in a lot of these cases.
No, I agree with that. You shouldn't mimic either side in order to answer, the other side, because that's confusing too. We have our own distinctive view. We don't want to turn to the state. We want people to work things out, again, through free association, the whole range of cooperation, including trade, and sometimes with formal contracts where that is a good idea. It depends on what the situation is, who the people are involved, and that's what we ought to be pushing, and getting the state out. How the state will mess things up, whatever it does. So I always like the Ron Paul message that we ought to prioritize. He wanted to really attack the war state first, right? The war and surveillance, and then we'll fight about the welfare state and the other stuff afterwards. That does seem like a good thing, but it didn't really catch on. He excited people during his campaigns, but of course he didn't get presidential nomination, and then it kind of faded away, and other people took his place. But that at least was a good message. Can't we all the opponents of the established order at least agree on this? We gotta roll back the warfare state, end these wars, not get in new ones, stop the surveillance, and all the rest of that. But that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anyway. You have Congress, even the so-called squad, which are supposed to be these great radicals, voting to reauthorize surveillance and send money, tons of money to Ukraine. Who can you count on? So I think we're pretty much on our own. Maybe there can be individual coalitions here and there on particular issues. But,
I don't know if you saw this, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Right.
Okay. The old trope of the anti-war radical left being dead. I hate to say it, but they've really done a whole thing again with this whole. It's a lot of things, but a lot of it is the woke politics, identity politics, and everything. They really have roped so many people left of center into just not having any place in their worldview, any place in their ideology for the anti-war view, and unfortunately that view is now skewing right, which just further turns off people on the left. Yeah. To not that people on the right shouldn't have sympathies that way, if it's the right view, of course, but even further turns off people on the left. And when it comes to, we don't have a full-blown war that this state is actively participating in right now. But when it comes to look at this whole Ukraine mess, I mean, it's very clear that you see a lot of misfits kind of raising up some doubts, but it's very hard to see an anti-war, coalition forming in the current political environment. It's very, very pessimistic, and I think even more pessimistic about laissez-faire and free markets.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. I don't know, the attempt at left and right began, with the Vietnam War, where Murray Rothbard and a small circle around him was working fruitfully for a bit with new leftists, some major new leftists, because they had a common enemy there, namely the war in Vietnam and the U.S. Unceasing efforts to do whatever it is we're doing there. And that worked for a bit, but that didn't hold together. And then, then Rothbard switched strategies when the Soviet Union closed shop. They got the idea that Rothbard and the people he was close to got the idea that, well, we can rejoin with the conservatives now, because the Cold War used to divide us, but now, there's no more Soviet Union, so that's not in the way. So therefore, they're for limited. They don't like an unlimited central government. Yeah, they tend to be more localist. So that's really some of the right. And so that's where you get Rothbard and the people around him then turning to what was known as the paleo strategy, trying to appeal to paleo conservatives, paleo to distinguish them from the neoconservatives, who were for getting us all kinds of wars in the Middle East and other places. So things shift. They've shifted again. I don't know what Rothbard would be saying if he were alive today, but things have shifted a couple more times, since he passed the scene in 95, and it's really hard to sort things out. I mean, I just I just write my articles and call them as I see them, and if someone responds, great. But if not, there's not much I can do about it.
Yeah, I think I think Murray Rothbard would be saying much the same as we are now. Kind of none of the above. Find who you can and just stick with them and see what happens. But no, I was going to say earlier, I saw an article, a headline that AOC is palling around and like doing a tour with like military recruiters. And
really?
That's the squad for you. So, continuing on with other terms that maybe we should abolish, that maybe what we might call anti-concepts. You've done several great talks on, and Roderick Long has as well, on the terms capitalism and socialism.
Right.
Do you think we as anarchists should, discard these terms, and why?
Well, yeah, I have written about that. In fact, I wrote about it just a couple of weeks ago, again, in quoting one of my articles from years ago. The problem is those terms, everybody has their own definition almost. I mean, look, you got Bernie Sanders, who's America's best known democratic socialist. He was once asked at a CNN town hall, I believe, what do you mean by socialism? And he said, I mean an economy that works for all of us. Well, that's not very specific. I want an economy that works for all of us. Laissez-faire works for all of us. Freedom works for all of us. So that doesn't help. That's his, he's afraid to tell America, either that's his real definition or he's afraid to tell the people what he really means by that. A lot of people use the word socialism, and all they really mean is an enhanced welfare state, which is we ought to be objecting to that, but they don't mean. If you read the Communist Manifesto, about abolition of private property sums up, the whole thing. Once you get rid of private property, you don't have money, you don't have markets, and then you have collective or state ownership of so-called means of production. So that's what socialism once meant. They don't mean that now. Medicare for all is not socialism. You may call it socialistic, but they're not calling for the government to own all the hospitals and be the employer of all doctors and nurses. They mean they want the government through the tax system to pay people's bills. Well, that's just an enhanced welfare state. And again, I'm not accepting that, but it's not socialism. So you see how the word is used. Same with capitalism. And Roderick Long has I quote in my article, Roderick Long has a good discussion of this as well, where he says, but most people don't use the word capitalism to mean purely the free market or purely the neo-mercantilist, highly interventionist, more or less pro-business intervention, government system we have today. They don't mean it purely one or the other. Their idea of capitalism is it's the free market system that's in effect right now in the United States and other Western countries, and that's a contradiction because what does exist in these countries are not the free market. But people think capitalism means the free market that now exists in these countries. That's capitalism. So we have to untangle that for people. And so the word, lots of libertarians have had misgivings about the word capitalism. Hayek had misgivings about it. First of all, it's not understood. It highlights only one aspect of an economy, namely capital, which may be very important. Money capital is very important to calculation, as Ludwig Mises showed. It's vital. But it's only one other thing. It's only one thing. It sounds like privileging of owners of capital. We don't want to sound that way. That's cronyism. We don't want that. So I avoid the word. I say free market or some alternative, but I just try to be clear. If you're arguing with someone who claims to be a socialist, it does no good. It's a waste of time to be saying, no, here's what the word capitalism really means, and then the other person could say, no, here's what the word socialism really means. Forget all that. What you need to argue is, are we living in a system where individuals are free politically, legally, economically to invest, consume, trade? Are they free to do that stuff without interference by the state or not? That's the question, not what we're going to call it. And the same for the socialist. Tell me what you want. If you say you're a socialist, tell me what you want. Don't throw a word around. Say what it is you want, and then we can argue about that. That's what I think you have to do. These words, are beyond hope right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have a real shit list, so to speak, of words, and obviously it first starts with as of Dr. Long said, capitalism being an anti-concept, and I think the next on the list, I guess the next on the list should be socialism, and then liberal, conservative, pretty awful. And honestly, woke is getting pretty up there too as well. But when you look at the kind of the political currents that we have going on right now, you mentioned free enterprise and the ability to to trade and make economic choices without interference and engage in kind of engage in exchange and the free enterprise, not just exchange, but kind of saving and investing your resources and making your own economic plans and owning your own tools in production or working with whoever you want, depending on what's optimal for you. In your preferences and everything. I guess just kind of restating that, but it seems like the issue is, and this goes back to being optimistic and pessimistic, is that this isn't surprising, but every proposal, every idea, that seems so ethereal when it comes to actual politics, that everyone's trying to come up with the economic plan of more centralization, more government controls on trade, making a deal with China or more tariffs and so forth. And it's really we seem so far this far past, almost 100 years past the 30s, when they tried to bury laissez-faire and declare it dead, which is basically, free market, free enterprise, free market and free enterprise, since we don't say capitalism, and I haven't for years. So where do we go from? How do we make the case for laissez-faire and free markets or freed markets in an environment where generations past that even being seen as a viable option, and it seems like almost going back in time and deconstructing these large status structures that have been kind of superimposed on our basic everyday economic activity. We just seem so far past, like I said, the declaration that laissez-faire is dead.
Well, I think we need to start from the ground up. I like approaches that various people have made. So Michael Huemer, the philosopher at Colorado, and he's not the first to do this, starts by pointing out that if you were to do things that the state does, or that lots of people want the state to do, it would be, and Bastiat actually, Frederick Bastiat made this point in the 19th century, early 19th century. If you were to do things that the state does, you'd be seen as a criminal, right? If you went with a gun from door to door and said, "Give me 10% of your income, I want to give it to the poor," or name your cause, everybody would realize you're a thief, an armed robber. So you can start that way and then say, well, why is the state different? And we can't vote that kind of power to the state, because you have to have it yourself before you can vote it, delegate it to a third party. So there's that. That's a good approach, and an approach that goes with it or independently ought to be used is Hayek's great point that the people at the center can never know enough. They don't have access to the information, and much of which is never articulated. It's not in the form of data. You can go to a database and get it, because it's in the minds and tastes and preferences of people. Often they don't know how they'll choose until they actually confront an alternative. And a lot of times we face alternatives that we didn't even anticipate. And so we could never in advance even say what we would do if that choice was up to us. That's why central planners will always get it wrong, and they'll resort to force. I mean, how do you have a central plan and meanwhile have consumer freedom? If you're able to change, as a consumer, if your tastes are going to change, which I know they do, and you're going to switch from buying, X, Y, and Z to something else, how can there be a central plan if you're free to do that? So what happens to freedom? I mean, I think pointing those two things out, this moral point about, if you did what the state did, you'd be in big trouble, and you should be, and most people and everybody would know you're wrong. That plus the idea that central planners will always suffer from, fatal knowledge deficiencies it can't possibly have, and that there's no substitution for the trade and cooperation of countless individuals who know their own case better than anyone else. Hayek talked about local knowledge of time and place. There's no substitute for any of that. Those are two themes I think we really need to pound away on. There are others too, but those are two that come to mind.
So I'm going to try to respond without using the terms left and right, because I'm going to follow my own rules here. But there's a certain strand of, we'll say, free marketeers that I find value in the sense that they apply that same knowledge problem to large firms, which is something that I think some other free marketeers sort of lack or drop the ball on that point. People like Chartier and Charles Johnson, and also Kevin Carson, they would say that the current state of big business is being protected from what you might call diseconomies of scale, which is kind of another way of saying internal knowledge problems or inefficiencies. And these things would these large corporate firms would not exist in a free market because of the same the problems with central planning that you just described. Do you have any? Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, well, of course, the people you name and other people that have used the term left libertarian, including me, always point out that this problem is only a problem that occurs where there's the corporate state exists and is giving shelter to companies. It was never the position of the left libertarians that I know of, including myself, who said that that's a free market problem. That's a problem because you don't have a free market. In a free market, if a company tried to do too much, and this even happens even today with all the intervention, and it's happened over the last 40 years, if a company gets too big to where an information problem puts it at a competitive disadvantage with rivals, and they could be brand new rivals that just get into the market, they're going to learn real fast that they've that they're suffering a knowledge problem. They're going to get the feedback. What the state does is keeps them from getting the feedback because it first of all, it may exclude or impede competitors, and it may outright subsidize the favored firm, so it doesn't ever get the market feedback that it's grown too large. So that's not a problem for markets. So I agree with the people that have criticized that. Also make a good point. I mean, even today, even big companies, Fortune 500 companies, are not completely immune from market forces. Companies go out of business. Fortune 500 companies move in and out of the list of 500 companies over the years. Exxon a few years ago, well, maybe 40 years ago, decided it wanted to get into all kinds of things like office furniture and stuff. And they realized that was a bad mistake. And within a year or two, they had sold off those divisions. So it's not completely immune. And I'm just saying that as a matter of fact, and I'm not favoring the intervention because they're not totally immune. I want them to be more immune. I want them to be, I don't want them to have shelter from market forces. The market winds ought to blow, and those companies, if they're not responsive, will get beaten by competitors. So economies of scale is a good thing. And the market is the thing that tells you if it's become a diseconomy, because you're not going to last long.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And this kind of goes back to our what we were just talking about with capitalism and socialism, and I just wanted to sort of add to this. Like previously in history, people that would have called themselves socialists would have agreed very much with what we're saying now, in the sense that they wanted what they called socialism, which to them meant they no longer wanted society to be dominated by holders of capital, which they believed the state was. They were free marketeers. We're talking about Thomas Hodgkins and William B. Greene and Benjamin Tucker and even Proudhon. And their way that they wanted to achieve what they saw as socialism was to remove the state and allow the market to flourish, which they thought would, through things like diseconomies of scale, would lessen the power of holders of capital, and which they saw as being propped up by the state, which in many cases they are. And would give more purchasing power to labor, right? So if you can imagine a market where there's very low barriers, there's no artificial barriers to entry. It's very easy to start your own business, be an entrepreneur, etc. You would think if workers had much more, it was much easier for a worker to just say, no, I'm going to go start my own business. They would have much more leverage to be compensated for their labor, because more people would be self-employed or start a business or what have you, just because it's easier to do so. And even people that worked for a wage would always have that as an option, as an exit strategy. It would be much easier for you to say, no, this isn't working for me anymore. I'm going to go work for myself. And therefore, they just have much more leverage in terms of labor compensation. So these people in history would have called themselves socialist. Ben Tucker to his dying day called himself a socialist, and he chat.
Not to his dying day. He did for a long time, but I would say
long time.
He gave up the word, kind of later in life.
Yeah, and he did speak out against communist and state socialist, even while calling himself a socialist. And then just to speak to capitalism real quick, so and I've said this before, and our listeners have heard this before, but if you go back to the history of the birth of capitalism, or what we call capitalism, coming out of feudalism in the late 1600s, it was very much sort of a collusion between the politicians of the day and what you might call the merchant class or the moneyed elite against the old aristocracy. So they were sort of overusing politicians and armies, and there was collusions amongst the what we would call now big business or the banking elite, etc. To sort of erode the power of the dying old aristocracy. And to me, this is what changed my thoughts about the term capitalism. Is at what point did that ever change? It's just been the same since that time up until today, right? And yes, it's because of the state. It's not because of the market, but that's how this system has worked since that term was coined to describe this economic paradigm. Do you disagree with anything I just said?
I think that maybe that's a little oversimplified, because there's as an analogy, let's think of the year 1215, where the barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. Mm-hmm. Now, those rights only applied to a very special class of individuals in England, right? The barons. But that's set in motion, not by, I'm not saying by the baron's intention, but it's hard to contain that. And people started getting ideas. And I think the same thing it must have been going on in the development of events that you're talking about. People got the idea about individual enterprise, about being on their own, not being tied to the old ways. And so even though it was maybe hatched for a privileged group, they couldn't totally contain that. So I think it was always somewhat mixed. I think there was more what we would call free market activity in there, between the in the cracks and the shadows, where it couldn't be out in the open. And you get these fairs that are going on in Europe in the in the later Middle Ages, where there's trade going on, and you get the law merchant, which is very important, and that's sort of an international commercial law that's generated by the merchants themselves, because they're traveling across government lines, and they needed a uniformity, and they generated it on their own. A lot of that is not steeped in government privilege, as far as I understand it. I mean, I've been reading about that stuff over the years, and lots of good stuff comes out of that. I mean, this all percolates over 800 years or so, and emerges. And you're right; a lot of it is corrupted, but that doesn't mean it's all corrupt. So,
I would say that it was a better paradigm than the system that existed before, certainly. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of positive benefits that came out of that, even for the average person. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying fundamentally the paradigm the structure of the paradigm is the same. And there was it's better than the old aristocratic way of doing things. That was very stagnant. There was no hope for anyone in the lower classes then. So you might say that this system is better. All I'm saying is that that collusion between the state and big business has been there this whole time. It's just
I agree that it's been there this whole time, but I'm going a little further than saying it's better than what preceded it. I'm going a little bit further by saying the people in charge couldn't control everything. You can't do it, especially back then, right? They didn't have the same kind of surveillance, and they didn't have technology to spy on people. There were people doing things out of the view of the rulers, and even out of the view of the dominant holders of capital. So there's too much. There's a lot of spontaneous order going on. That's what I want to say.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can't let the fact
point.
that what you're describing overshadow the fact that people could still do things, and they were struggling and pushing for ever more freedom in various places. There are books written about this, and this is happening in Europe, of course, mostly Western Europe. They're battling on the ground for just a couple of inches of freedom, basically, and sometimes winning. And so this is what grows out of that. Liberalism didn't I mean, in the good sense, the classical liberalism doesn't begin with somebody reading Locke's treatise under the village tree to everybody. Locke writes about it after it's already going on. He observes it going on. It's like a dictionary, right? A dictionary doesn't invent the language; it reflects the language. And so people are doing things, and then the political philosophers come along and start to codify it in one way or another. People don't sit around and just wait. They're doing what they can do to and if they're not well connected, then they're doing it in more or less free trade, free exchange modes of action. So I just want to give them the due. I don't want that those people whose names we'll never know. I didn't want them to be overlooked.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. That's a fair rebuttal. I agree with what you said. There was a positive cultural shift that came out of that as well, which I think is what you're describing.
Well, like you see that in the work of Deirdre McCloskey, her work on the bourgeois trilogy, right? About how there's an ethic changes.
Bourgeois morality. Yep.
Yeah, she's changed my view. She changed my views on a little bit just hearing her on podcasts for sure.
Right, and other people have suggested that. I mean, Deirdre McCloskey has certainly developed it through 3 large volumes, but others, the historian Fernand Braudel, and others have gotten at some of this.
And actually maybe
orderly. They don't write the history. That's the thing. It doesn't get into the history books so much because they don't write the histories.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still doing things. This is an evolution. Hundreds of years of evolution. And it's easy to miss, but it is happening. And so the Industrial Revolution is a culmination not just of the ins getting together and going deciding what should come after feudalism, but there's also outs who are very busy.
Yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure.
On
and that's true of all human history, right? Human history is most often. The writing down politicians writing down their activities, right? There's very few histories written about sort of the common people, and no commoner was writing down, I traded a couple of sheep for some sacks of grain today. Nobody was writing that down. That
right.
All
they were generating customs that became like a commercial law.
Yep. And oral traditions and that. Yeah, exactly right.
That stuff is always important. We can't let the other thing overshadow that. That's definitely happening too. What you said, definitely was important and was going on, but it wasn't the whole story.
Fair point. Yeah. Penguin, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were saying something.
No, you mentioned everything you said, but also Mr. Richmond, Deirdre McCloskey might have been the first thing that set me on the path to sort of understanding the role of over time. I listen to a lot of podcasts mostly, so maybe if I'd pick up a book on it might elucidate that a little better. But just the role of the rise of the bourgeois class and liberalism and what that kind of meant in medieval or post-medieval Europe and the actual cultural and then economic transformation that meant that they kind of wanted this to go and set themselves apart as innovators and productive people, set themselves apart from the society kind of dominated by the legacy powers, the aristocracy and clergy and stuff, and put those kind of traditions, superstitions, whatever kind of rules, I guess, Cajun people in aside and kind of start economic production and free exchange kind of without those paradigms. And they created, the economic order that brought us from medieval period into early modernity and created the forebears of capitalism, including all the good parts that come from market relations and free trade that we still enjoy today. And it's hard to extract the good and the bad from those things. Yeah. But I think one kind of take I've gotten from that's repeatedly happens in a market system, in a a bourgeois, liberal, or capitalist system, is a centrist critique that I've kind of come up with. Is a little bit different than the one that second I've shared for a while, and that is that I think when you get a bourgeois class, and knowing what the historical significance of the bourgeois class was, you'll see people that are very economically or financially successful accumulate very large, typically very large sums, and actually this still works actually down the scale too. But people that generally form that higher, more educated bourgeois class, maybe it's the second generation that's in business, or maybe it's just something that happens generation and generation down the line, that they start to think that they can have an effect on society and on planning society higher than the market and higher than entrepreneurialism or investment and exchange, but that they want to transcend simply what they can do with their finances. So they engage in social planning and social engineering and on these kind of grand schemes for society that really almost betray kind of what the significance of the bourgeois class, that they their social significance. They want to become enlightened, you could say Illuminati, enlightened people that want to engineer society in a way that they cannot do just with market activity and even with their wealth alone, even if it's a large amount of wealth. And I think that's kind of a trend that I see kind of occurring and recurring, that they at some point, and it could be maybe a second and third generation of a fortune that was gained through whatever market activity, did they want to transcend marketism almost. And it's very common throughout the kind of what you would call the bourgeois class.
Yeah, I mean, that's a temptation. We need to have a check on that, mainly through people generally being suspicious of anyone says, I could run. I ought to be running everything because I think I know how to do it. That person ought to be, everybody's eyebrows should go up when they hear those words spoken. It may be tempting to think, yeah, I'm pretty good. I've made a lot of money. My business is pretty successful. I could run society. We need at least a taboo where everyone else would say, no, you're going past your. Man needs to know his limits, as Dirty Harry says in the movies. Man needs to know his limitations. Just because you can run a business doesn't mean you can run a society or an economy. So we need to. That's what we need to teach people, so that they have almost like a knee-jerk reaction to society-wide planning, or anybody that's got the big plan, the blueprint. You want to change society, start a business and offer a product that people are going to want. Don't try to do any more than that. That's what those people need to be told. How you bring that about, I don't know. We've been trying for, at least my generation has been trying for a while. Younger generations are giving it their shot. I don't know how things are going to turn out. At the moment, they're not looking great.
Sheldon, don't be too pessimistic, because it was your generation that laid the foundation for what Penguin and I's generation is doing now, which is just furthering these ideas. And I honestly think it's not a matter of if, but when. It might be a few generations from now or a long time from now, but I think the wheels are in motion, and sort of time and incentives are kind of on our side. But
well, thank you for that. Thank you for cheering me up.
Yeah, you've done great work over the years, and it's appreciated, and I don't think it's for nothing. So,
well, thank you. And of course, we got the baton from a previous generation, Rothbard's generation, who got it from an earlier. So we're keeping it alive, and you really can't predict social change, and we just have to keep plugging away. And
you never know what the future holds.
Yes, that's right. People are free will.
Exactly. Well, we've kept you for an hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. But would you come back? And you are an authority on the topic of Israel, and I'd really love to have a conversation.
Yeah,
on that and maybe talk about your book coming to Palestine a bit.
Sure.
And if you'd like to come back, we'd love to have you back on.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to come back.
All right, excellent. Is there anything that you want to plug before, or actually, Penguin, did you have something you just wanted to say?
No, you are reminding me. I've heard some very interesting things. Something I don't remember where in podcast form that you did, Sheldon, about Israel and its history. Yeah, I completely forgot
he's
about
the guy to talk to.
It's not real recent. Yeah. There are people that know a hell of a lot more history than I know, but I know a fair amount. I've been writing about it since the 80s. And so that book that you mentioned, Coming to Palestine, was a compilation of articles that stretched back 30 years. So that gives you some sense. But I'd be happy to talk about it.
All right, excellent. Is there anything you'd like to plug? You got anything
I'll
coming
plug the
out?
Libertarian Institute. Visit every day. We got great writers, Jim Bovard, and lots of people, lots of different people on lots of different subjects: foreign policy, domestic policy, and that's the thing I plug right now. I don't have any new book coming out, so I can't plug that.
Any recent articles that you've done that you think our audience would enjoy?
Well, you can find them at the Libertarian Institute. The last two things I wrote were related to Israel, so people can look those up. And then before that, there was the one about the debating, do we want capitalism, socialism, or what? So put some more formal format kinds of things we were discussing today with plenty of links. In fact, there's a bunch of articles, recommended reading at the end of that with links if people wanted to see what Roderick Long has written about it and what some others have written about it, if they want to pursue that subject.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely look for those. And again, thanks for coming on. And we appreciate all your work. And your work is much appreciated. We'll say that at the very least.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that, and I do. I enjoyed the time here, and I'll be happy to come back.
Yeah, this was great. And everybody listening, be excellent to each other, and everybody have a good weekend.
Take care.
Take care.
Ciao.
Bye.